the old town of Lublin. In front of me is the Gate. You can see the date of it up there, 1785. Although that's when that particular Gate was built, because there had been gates on this site before. In fact, the walled city had a gate down there as well. You can see some of these houses, some have been very nicely done up, and others are awaiting being done up. I've been talking to a gentleman who, his grandfather bought one of these buildings in 1937, and he's in the process of doing it up. There's a huge amount of work he's got there, and to be quite honest, I'm absolutely amazed at his dedication, and also the financial outlay, which is not inconsiderable. What we have there is also the gate to the ghetto. In fact, it was the ghetto from the ghetto. This was the upper part of the ghetto, which is where the people who worked for the Nazis, or the Jugendrat, or other people that the Nazis, for whatever reason, wanted to keep alive. And below it is the other part of the ghetto where the mass lived, the unemployed, people who earned from maybe selling services to other Jews. That's where they were. They were the people slated for extermination first, because of course the people lived up here didn't survive much longer either. In many ghettos, one of the problems is food. And in Lublin it wasn't so much the case. That is not to say that people didn't die from starvation, because they did. But people would die from starvation because they would run out of money. When the Nazis came here, they stopped Jewish bank accounts, they stopped people as ways of earning a living, they stole things as they saw fit, and people would then just live off whatever savings. And when I say savings, I mean whatever possessions they had. However, in Lublin it wasn't actually sealed off in the way that Warsaw or Łódź or other places were sealed off. Here, the barbed wire enclosures were clearly only temporary, and people, even towards the very end of the ghetto in March 1942, they were still able to trade with people. Furthermore, there were many people who didn't actually live inside the ghetto. They had special permits to live outside of it. So the result of this was that starvation did not occur to the same degree. You'd still see dead people lying in the street, but not as it was, for example, in Warsaw. One of the problems here, however, was water supply, and there were outbreaks of cholera, for example, which you don't really see so much in other places. We see people actually taking water from the stream, which went where the main road is today, and the water was clearly polluted, but they had no choice. There were wells, of course, up here as well. In fact, the gentleman I just been talking to showed me where the well was in his courtyard, and that would also have done. But in many ghettos, the water was a problem. It was a problem also in Warsaw. Another thing which you got here, or didn't get here so much, was a cultural life. I think many of the intelligentsia and the wealthier people actually fled Lublin. Now, younger people who may have formed a basis for cultural life escaped, because when the Soviet troops were not so far away, and it was well known how the Nazis were treating Jews in their own country. And another thing is that the intelligentsia, I think to a large extent, escaped to Warsaw. I think in Łódź as well you see a lot of people escaping to Warsaw. That means you don't see here like the theatrical or whatever performances that you get there. Another thing which happened is that many of the buildings weren't sort of joined together. They were individual, detached houses and things like that in the other part of the ghetto. You can't see these buildings any longer. And this stopped people coming together as a community. Lublin ghetto wasn't founded until, enclosed I should say, until March 1941. So that's somewhat later than others. I mean, it's almost a year after the Łódź ghetto was sealed off. However, it was one of the first ones to be actually liquidated, which was in March 1942. So they started, in fact, it was the first large town. And the Nazis did murder people in the villages in eastern Poland, areas that had been occupied by the Soviet Union in 1939. But this was the first town of any size where the Jewish population was murdered en masse by transports to the death camp in Bełżec. And once it happened here, then followed in other places in the Lublin region, indeed, very quickly all over Poland. The strange thing is, however, when these reports reached Warsaw, Adam Czerniaków refused to believe it, and he believed that this had been exaggerated. I think this is a way of grasping at straws and refusing to believe it. I was in this restaurant last week in front of us. There was a gentleman there from Israel, and he said his mother, who'd been in Auschwitz, she was born in 1920, and she said there was a man she spoke to in Auschwitz, and she'd been working on sorting, so there was contact with men. She said, there are people who say that people are being gassed in there, and he didn't believe it, and he was in Auschwitz. So what is grasping at any straw, that not wanting to face up to reality, and the reality is so horrible, who could actually blame them?